These experiences that people have with the Greys are in between what we would consider life and what seems to be the afterlife. These stories always have to do with extraordinarily bizarre circumstances. Circumstances that really play in the world of magic. It touches things like ghosts, it touches things like the fairy realm, it touches things that have to do with time. A lot of the experiences that people term abductions or just experiencer accounts, or whatever name you want to apply to it, illustrate a kind of shift that occurs in the individuals that are experiencing that. I remember hearing stories about how the Greys would prefer not to open up portals in people's houses because they have a kind of dimensional after effect that will invite other elements that have to do with other supernatural experiences to interact with the people in those experiences of contact with the Greys. So a lot of the times I would hear stories that they would open up these portals, so to speak, to enter into our reality in fields. They would give instructions in people's minds for them to go to a particular area at a particular time. They would either feel drawn, obsessed, or motivated in some way to find themselves to this particular location, and then the experience would take place. This happens a number of times in these experiences. The Greys experience reality in a different kind of configuration than the kind of reality experience that the majority of us have on a day-to-day basis. A lot of the newer children that are waking up on the planet have abilities that are kind of psychic repercussions or amplifications of their interaction with the Greys to a certain extent. So a lot of these children will have the ability to slip in and out of reality and to play with time. They may also display very many psychic abilities, like telekinesis. They may be able to understand things that there is no seeming way that they could understand, and yet somehow have access to this information. A lot of these children are displaying the kind of after effect that you would have when they interact with the Greys. You kind of get taken up a few notches in terms of your psychic awareness and ability to interact in a more holistic way with the world. You might have challenges on a multitude of different levels, both mentally, physically speaking. I know sexuality comes up as a play that many people who have experiencer accounts have to deal with. There seems to be an element that actually wakes up something within the average people who make up the majority population of humanity. A lot of us are asleep on many of the independent energy levels that exist in our body. When you interact with a being that is more holistic, it naturally raises these kinds of experiences within you. Prolonged interaction will have those kinds of effects. It's just the same kind of effect as if you were to spend a lot of time with people who have like a more advanced intellect than you do. Whether you want to or not, just the consistency of that interaction with those kinds of people will bring up various ideas that you wouldn't have considered if you weren't interacting with them in that way. And so that kind of resonant mirroring that happens when you interact with the Greys helps people see the nature of where the Greys actually experience themselves outside of what we would term our physical reality. It's not to say that they are not part of it and they are stepping into it like aliens. It's almost like saying your body exists on like an angelic level, but your awareness is only awake on like the human level. As you start to wake up, you start to have more of those angelic qualities descend into your physical experience and express themselves more naturally. This is what people in the New Age community term awakening. A lot of the time, that's exactly what it is. You're just waking up to the bigger you never knew you really were the entire time. So a lot of these profoundly exciting supernatural experiences can happen. Some of the time they can be absolutely traumatic from an unawakened person's perspective. A lot of the time you're waking up areas of yourself that are incredibly dark and devastated and traumatized unconsciously. A lot of areas that are backwards based on where the majority generally is. Whatever level you're at, you will generally mirror or take on the characteristics and qualities of the people you most strongly resonate with. And so as you have these kind of experiences, you wake up into higher and higher and higher levels of who you really are. That is the level that the Greys are interacting with us in this frequency. I wanted to relate something that was shared with me in a dream that you could call an abduction or experiencer account of contact with the Greys. Whether this is an actual physical experience or not, I cannot verify. However, I will discuss it and I will tell you the information as far as I experienced it within this dream. I'm aware a lot of the time that in dreams, you have interactions with people that are not just elements of your own psyche interacting with itself. That a lot of the times when you are dreaming, it is a shared experience, as much a shared experience as the reality that you're living in right now. You have an experience with an exterior world, a population of people who are not you, and yet you can have some kind of interaction with them. There is, from my perspective, no real difference when you're dreaming. You have an open door to an experience of a multitude of different dimensions and levels of reality that you are not fully conscious of from your generic 3D consciousness that you have normally. So when you dream, you actually interact with other people whether you realize it or not. A lot of that experience is your natural experience of higher density. The idea of the afterlife and the idea of dreams, in many senses, are one and the same experience. They are the exact same place. And so when you go to sleep at night, you literally have to reconnect to the part of you that is disconnecting when you wake up. If you have experiences with the Greys, you are physically and viscerally aware of cutting right through that fold in consciousness and having a very shocking experience of what it is to actually be awake and interact in what you just assume is a play in your mind, which it isn't. You are having actual physical experiences. In a sense, you could say a sublime level that appears to be mental abstraction in your own physical experience. So when you have that experience every single night when you go to sleep, you are not just going to La La Land and playing in a world of fantasy. You are actually physically interacting with authentic, living, physical experiences on a level that's at a higher density. In a sense, you could say you are kind of playing in heaven with the experiences you need to be able to reintegrate elements of yourself that are not fully worked out with in your everyday life. That also takes place in terms of the kind of meetings that you will have. You may not even remember a lot of the meetings, but work is being done, whether your consciousness of it or not. And when I say work, it isn't just work, it's more of a play of interaction, more of an open experience of floating into the levels and areas of yourself you're not fully in touch with. So a lot of the times there can be those kinds of mental creations that help you work out various experiences on a more immediate level that can take place in an established physical reality such as it exists in the world, but it is actually a real place. Your experiences with dreams are where the Greys have their kind of real estate on humanity. But this is also why it's so triggering and so confronting and so upsetting in many senses. Their awareness of what reality is drops out a lot of the social norms that we've all been heavily raised in and steeped in our entire lives, and that do not correspond to the negative polarization we do not recognize that we collectively have as a species. A lot of those experiences get termed abductions, and they get polarized in terms of their perspective projected on in very negative ways. When there is explanations, if you're willing to actually do the work and go through those memories, that can explain a different state of being by beings who have a more comprehensive perspective on life in general. Because they're at that level, they're tapped into all kinds of things that would be enormously beneficial to like human beings, and work actively with the human population to assist them in creating the circle that they're already part of. As I've said before, my guide, Sarah, has told me the story that you see the Greys living is actually the story of the humans that exist currently as the regular population. Many generations down the road, there is a splitting in humanity. The ones who are awakening will constitute a small minority of positively coherent people that will allow them to create a different path, assisted by the Greys, to create a more comprehensive and positive story. But this story is not what the majority is living. The majority of the humans you see around you, genetically speaking, one day down the line will de-evolve and become the story of the Greys, which then goes full circle as they are now taking care of their earlier selves. This can happen because time is just another dimension. It's like a different way, a different perspective of seeing things. And so we all live in time, but the idea is that you are all of it and none of it at the same time. And so when you see that, it's all interactional right now, provided you are awake on those levels. And there are humans, and there always have been, who always were. A lot of these humans would be shelved into the category of wizards, magicians, witches throughout history. This is how it would be contextualized back in earlier times, but they are literally interfaces with reality that have a more comprehensive viewpoint than the majority viewpoint that exists as contemporary humanity. So, my experience with the Greys, as far as I can see, was a legitimate experience, but looked nothing like the kinds of interactions or contact that many people do. The experience was shown to me in a dream, in metaphor. The dream begins with me inside what looks like a shelf in like a wall of shelves, almost like an industrial freight shelving unit. It was a very confined space. It was only big enough to fit me in, almost like a coffin. Like, it was just very small, and it was very simple. From that, I was suddenly elevated up and removed from that shelf. The next thing I remember is entering a door to a very bright place. The door was inside a level of darkness that I was in when I was in that shelf. So the door opens, and the first being that I see there is what looks like a comic representation of a mantis being. It was like a cartoon almost like a child's Halloween mask that has a very cartoon-like element to it that looks very simple, very rudimentary, silly even. Like someone was using photographic reality to create a kind of like mask of themselves, because it just didn't look real, even though what was being used to illustrate it was from my perspective. This door entered to this being, who was the person who greeted me when I first entered this space. The mantis being was actually kind of short, but had a slightly more elongated head than the other beings I would see later. They were green, and they had the big eyes. But like I said, they almost looked like a cartoon representation of themselves. I greeted this being, and I walked into a space that from my perspective looked like a brightly lit mall. When I looked down over the railings, it was maybe 7 stories tall. I can't be too sure, I just know that it was a very tall building and I was in the middle of it. As I walked around on that upper level, I noticed greys that looked like the mantis being, but less elongated heads than the first person that I saw. And their skin was kind of like a grayish, like pale white. But once again, these were not real greys. They were almost like children wearing masks of greys. Cartoon in a kind of like strangely real way. And as I passed by these cartoon-like greys that almost look like robot beings just simply walking around, almost as if they were like bobbleheads, you know, the little bobbleheads that you see? Like a visceral, photographic, real version of that, where you look at them and you go, this is just like a fake being. I don't understand what I'm looking at here. I walked around, I went down several levels, and I was passing by a number of these greys. I eventually ended up in a shop. In this shop, I saw a woman who was like a human woman who was topless and essentially had the same kind of cartoon-like expression that the greys had, but had a little bit more refinement to them. Like almost like they were like a mannequin, kind of. Like a living mannequin. She had kind of like a white body. She seemed like the greys there, kind of like a cartoon representation of themselves, like a fake version of who they really were. I was the only person who seemed like he was real, at least from what I could tell. I didn't really have a mirror or anything to see myself, but I did interact with these beings. The mall itself looked like a real mall. It did have a kind of like ethereal kind of quality in the background of it, but essentially looked like a mall. If you were to walk on a movie set where you would see a representation of a fake mall, not a real location mall, like that kind of. It was like not really real, but real enough to be something functional if it was necessary to use it that way. So everything in there essentially looked real enough, but the beings who were all around me, like I said, they were almost like masks, like cartoon representations of themselves. I don't, in fact, remember too much about this experience beyond this point. I know I had some kind of interaction here, and then the dream ended. The reason I bring this up is to discuss the nature of the reality that the greys actually interact with. The woman that I saw was Sarah. The reason why she was topless is not any kind of like sexual commentary or anything. It was just more of an expression of the body being a kind of false representation of the being that she and myself actually are. We place too much identification on skin, muscles, bones, and all the rest of it as being what we actually are because we've lost contact with our spirit, which from just a physical rudimentary perspective doesn't mean anything. It just seems insubstantial, even though it literally is what's wearing the entire reality that you see around you all day long. This idea of my account of this interaction in this level is a mask that creates a kind of symbolic interface for the experience that I was actually having. The experience, if you were to remove the mask that the physical symbols of the dream actually express, would look like nothing you could identify from a more physical understanding. It would be, in a sense, a mist of things that just really had no physical understanding in any kind of concrete way. That is the level that the greys actually live at. Sarah has told me that the greys are in fact a 6th density species, and that much of the hybrids that they are creating are interfaces between what humans generally are, which Sarah has told me is actually 4th density. Humans are split in terms of their understanding of who they really are, but they are actually meant to exist at 4th density, and that is the process of waking up and coming back together with yourself. There is not supposed to be any in-between where you are split between dreaming and waking. Your dream is the natural expression of your spirit having the physical incarnation in consciousness, so that you know and have control and awareness over how to interact with the reality. The splitting is a product of what happened back in our creation with the Anunnaki and has something to do with their story as well. But the creation of the hybrids that the Greys are creating exists between 6th density and 4th density. So they're actually 5th density beings, according to my guide, Sarah. This experience of 5th density is actually what I was seeing in that dream. This idea of 5th density is something beyond what most ordinary humans all around us have as an incarnational experience. A lot of the people refer to the Greys as being robots, being some kind of like biological entity. They aren't. It's just having that higher experience control over a 3rd density vessel for experience. I want to point out that if you look at many animals in nature, like just look at a bird, because most people will have this as like an experience they can find relatively easily. If you look at the way a bird turns its head and interacts with the environment, you can see something that looks, in many senses, like a robot. It's very, very precise, right? It will move quickly, almost animatronically. But you have complete awareness that this is not a robot at all. This is just a natural expression of nature. The Greys, in many senses, have that expression at a higher level of intelligence that we can recognize a different expression of what it means to be a life form or to be physically incarnate. And so I was having this kind of experience at 5th density as energy. And the symbolic overlay of what Sarah was putting on that created the understanding, physically speaking, so I could have an experience of what it was like to be involved in the Grey Society as a kind of visitor, she's saying. So as a kind of visitor, I was going around, I was interacting, and I was in the kind of shops, so to speak, of their environment, where they interchange energy, much in a way that's similar to like how we experience shopping at a mall. And so that was the overlay of that experience. The reason why I would have an experience like that and not a typical experiencer experience is because my genes have that capability. So a lot of the time where I experience myself is at those kinds of levels in terms of like my origin, my nature. I am not unique in this. A lot of people on the planet and for human history will have experiences that come and originate from 5th density, not 4th. Those people will have experiences that will come off in many, many different respects as being principles who allow various things to occur that are necessary to maintain the frequency or experience that we call the story of humanity. Among these people are beings like Jesus, Buddha, Muhammad, and the Holy Wovoka, beings that are referred to in Bashar's seminars as being hybrids. These hybrids have this kind of interaction with reality. This is, generally speaking, how the Greys have been able to interact with humanity beyond any kind of containment whatsoever or resistance that human beings can put up against them. They simply are just more comprehensively involved in the reality of how physical experience actually exists on levels that we're just simply not awake to yet. But this is where the Greys actually come from and how they actually express themselves through the different densities down into what we see as 3rd density. This is the nature of them, and this is how they utilize physical reality to create the expression of what seems to be bodies to basically interact with all of us. My name is Summer Wind. If you like these videos, please like, share, comment down below, and please share your experiences, because I'm always fascinated with the experiences that people have that have to do with the Greys. It has been a lifelong interest and fascination for me, and I'm more than happy to discuss more of my experiences or anything else that you would have to share with me. Have a wonderful day, guys.